What is going on, guys? It is Duct Tape Guns here, and this is the second of my two videos showing off my Steyr AUG A3 assault rifle model. In this video, I'm going to be taking apart the weapon, performing a field strip, and showing the internal parts and mechanisms of my model. In the first video, I gave an in-depth analysis of all the functions and whatnot, so if you guys want to check that out, I'll put the link in the description. It's a much more detailed overview of the functions. But for those of you who are more curious about the mechanics of the weapon or don't want to sit through that 13-minute long video of me talking about the functions in extreme detail, I'm just going to give a quick, concise overview of all the relevant functions. So we have a trigger here, and we have a working safety that when engaged, the trigger cannot go backwards. It is an ambidextrous safety, so it can be pushed or pulled or pulled or pushed from either side. We also have a charging handle here that, as you can see, moves the bolt back when pulled. Kind of like an MP5K style charging handle. It can be locked upwards, and as you can see, the bolt is held. We also have a bolt catch / bolt release, so if we pull it back and manually engage the bolt, we can lock the bolt backwards, and you can see the charging handle is independent of the bolt now, and then we can release it. Everything comes flying forward. We also have here a magazine release that when engaged, the magazine will fall out. I have two magazines, each with some Play 5.56 ammo in them. I have a foldable foregrip on the front here that can be switched in position with its pin. And finally, we have a top tactical rail that, instead of my past models where the tactical rail is more or less just a flat surface with Velcro, it is a now rail with some Velcro, which the Velcro serves no purpose. It's just more or less how I've built my guns over the years, so I'm sticking with that aesthetic. And it is a rail system now where the optics are actually slid on. Again, in my first video, I give a way more detailed overview of all these functions, and I go into detail. I even show another optic that I put on the top. I talk about the sling mounts and all that. So if you want a more in-depth video on all the details and functions, go check out the first video. I'll put the link in the description. But for now, we are going to be jumping into the field stripping segment of the video. Alright, so now on to the actual field stripping segment of the rifle. Just a disclaimer, obviously my rifle is not going to be capable of all the functions that the real-life weapon is capable of. As such, some of the internal parts of my model that you'll see serve no real mechanical purpose. They're just there to keep the experience of field stripping the weapon as authentic as possible. Also, you can see here I've laid out a measuring tape so that you can kind of gauge the dimensions of the rifle and its respective parts. The weapon is a 1-to-1 replica, though I will admit some of the pieces have been modified, as my model is made out of cardboard and craft wood, whereas the real-life weapon is made out of metal and polymer plastic. So some of the pieces had to be modified slightly, just so that my design still works. But they are 99% true to the actual weapon's parts. And I just want to say before I take it apart, I'm not by any means a gun expert, so there is a slight chance that I may say something that is not 100% correct, or I might misname some of the pieces, but more or less I try to keep things as accurate to weapon vocabulary and knowledge on this channel as possible. So if there's any mistakes that you catch, just let me know. Okay, so let's actually field strip the weapon now. So the first step of field stripping any weapon would be to make sure that the weapon is safe and that there are no rounds. So let's eject the magazine. And let's make sure that the weapon is clear and has no rounds in the chamber. Obviously, this part is a little trivial considering that, you know, it's a model. There's no way that it fires, and it's going to be safe 100% of the time. Okay, so to take the weapon apart, we were going to begin with the barrel, foregrip, and gas piston part, and that is removed with this pin here. On the real-life weapon, there's a little switch here, but a pin is much easier for me to make, so that's how I made it. And the 18-inch barrel, along with the foregrip and the gas piston, slide right out from the receiver. Here we can see that the gas piston is on the right-hand side of the weapon. The gas piston is actually what allows for semi-automatic and automatic fire. It collects the energy from the gas propelled from each round fired, pushes back, and pushes the bolt back to chamber the next round. And that allows for semi and automatic fire. This is the cap here, covering the gas piston, and this itself is the gas piston, along with the spring for the gas piston. Although this isn't really necessary of the field strip, we have the pin that holds the foregrip in place. The foregrip cannot move from this pivoting position, but considering that this pin is its own piece, I figure I take it out for the field strip. Also, one more thing I want to mention, you see how all these pieces are individually taped and colored, and that's because I sincerely value the detail of the field strip and making sure that every piece is tailored and made so that it is as accurate and as nice looking as possible. Okay, so now we are going to remove the receiver from this back housing. I don't really know what to call this, so that's just what I call it. We will press the receiver lock back here, and what that does is it allows the receiver to be removed from the receiver and the bolt carrier and the bolt to be removed from this housing in the back here. We can see the notch that the receiver lock catches onto. You can imagine it's a block with a notch carved out so that when it is pushed far enough that this small, even though it's a very shallow notch, is moved out of the way. Otherwise, it will be blocked and very stable and quite sturdy, even though it is such a tiny notch. Here we can see the charging handle and bolt catch mechanism. Simply push the charging handle back, and we can see that the bolt and bolt carrier are also pushed back. If there's a force applied, you can see how the charging handle will also move. If we were to lock the charging handle and apply a force, such as the spring in the back here, if I can show it, I'm not really sure if I can get it from this angle, but there's a very strong spring here in the back that is placed and glued in there so that it will not move. If a force is applied, say by very strong spring, it still will not push until we push it down. We can remove the bolt from this receiver. The charging handle, however, is stationary in here. Well, not stationary, but it is stuck in here. In my MP5K model, I kind of made it so that you could take this piece out, and I decided against that because not necessary for the field strip, and it makes the gun less sturdy, so I didn't do it. And that kind of concludes taking this part apart, unless you want to count the iron sights, but we don't need to do that. So, now we have the bolt/bolt carrier here. Again, I tried to stay true to the colors and how the bolt carrier works. It's a very strange looking bolt carrier. This rod here on the right, the longer one, is actually what engages with the gas piston, so that when the gases are pushed back, this pushes the entire bolt and bolt carrier back. And this rod here is what engages with the charging handle, or at least this is true for my model. Here we can see the bolt and bolt carrier, and in actuality, it is gray. And I should mention that these, again, I tried to stay true to the color for these and made them silver. I don't know if they're aluminum construction or whatever. This bolt is held in by this small bolt pin, which this may be a little bit of a design error on my part, but I had to keep it as concise as possible so that it can slide well in in its groove here for the bolt. So it is kind of tricky to remove, but I just take some scissors just to kind of pry it out a little bit, and then I do the rest with my fingers. Okay, and as you can see, as soon as I moved the bolt pin out, the bolt kind of went flying out from its little carrier here. That's because there is a little spring in there. On the real life weapon, the spring is a little bit longer and it's kind of ingrained in the actual bolt, but again, we're trying to keep it simple and, you know. So this is the actual bolt. This is what moves forward and backwards to fire the round. And this is the firing pin, which is what strikes the primer on each round to fire it. So let's move everything over a little bit. Okay. Lastly, on this entire housing, there's only one more, or a couple more pieces that can be taken apart, and that is from this pin here that has a sling mount on it. Remove this pin, and the back butt pad, as well as the trigger group, comes out of the weapon. As you can see, there's a sizable hole there for the trigger. So, for the trigger group. So, here is the trigger group. It's tan, as it is on the real weapon. This is the hammer that would strike the bolt. Again, the weapon doesn't actually fire, so this doesn't actually have any purpose, but it is nice to have a realistic little trigger group in the back. Very strange construction, this entire AUG. Part of what made it kind of fun to build. Field stripping wise, this is kind of as far as we can go, because this entire housing here is all one piece. The magazine catch and release, bolt catch and release, receiver lock, safety, and trigger are all embedded within the weapon. So unfortunately, I can't really show you their mechanical design, but I'm sure you can imagine more or less. These are just two sliding blocks. This is a little divot that catches onto this little indent in the bolt. On the real life weapon, I believe it actually catches onto the actual bolt carrier, but due to, again, this is not 100% accurate, but it's as close as I'm going to get with cardboard and craftwood and all that. This little divot right here is what the bolt catches onto. Safety and trigger, you can pretty much imagine what those are as well. And we can see the triangular hole that this entire receiver would fit into. So again, that pretty much concludes the field strip. Now, more or less the fun part is putting it all back together, which you just reverse the steps. So we take our trigger group, as well as our butt pad, place them, and they should line up nicely so that the pin fits right in, but I like to make sure that it is flush with the sloped AUG stock. Next, we're going to put the bolt back together, put the firing pin into the bolt, put the bolt spring into the bolt carrier, put the bolt into the bolt carrier, and secure it with the bolt pin, if I can line it up. Secure it with the bolt pin. Also, all the pieces here that are not taped are painted, because there's some parts of the weapon that it's not practical to tape them, because tape peels over time, and the last thing you need is something like a pin peeling and then the residue getting all within the weapon and stuff. So some of these pieces are painted. We can now put the bolt and bolt carrier back into the receiver, and as you can see, slides right in. We can now push the receiver lock back, put the bolt carrier and the receiver all back into the polymer housing. We can test to make sure that everything went well by charging the charging handle and seeing that the spring flies everything back forward, because the spring is part of the housing as opposed to being part of the bolt and the receiver and all that. Lastly, we can put the gas piston back together, as well as some of the various pins that I've taken apart here. The piston itself, the spring for the piston, as well as the cap for the piston. The pin for the foregrip, and allow us to put the 18-inch barrel back into the receiver, line up the hole with the notch, and simply put the pin back in. And we have ourselves a fully field stripped and put back together Steyr AUG A3. We can put a magazine in there, charge the weapon, and theoretically, it would be ready to fire. So again, this pretty much concludes the field stripping video of the AUG A3 and my overall analysis of this project. Really fun to make. You can see the amount of detail that I put into this thing, and again, it hasn't taken me a year total to build this, but over the course of the year, you can see how this has taken quite some time to build. I have a Twitter, @DuctTapeGuns, where I post any mechanical progress that I make on these projects. I post on there much more frequently than I do on YouTube. Hell, I don't even post on YouTube on, I post on it like probably every year. So pretty slow rate, and I don't respond to comments or anything, and that makes for a very slow experience. If anybody out there is curious to know what I'm doing, it leaves you kind of in the dark. My Twitter kind of solves that, because any progress I make on any of my projects or anything I'm thinking about, or if there's any updates, you can find out there. So again, @DuctTapeGuns, I'll put a link in the description. Other than that, thank you guys for watching. This has been my Steyr AUG A3 field strip video. I have an overview video. It's a little bit longer. Again, it's 13 minutes long, so I don't know if you'd want to actually sit there and watch all of that, but if you want a more in-depth view on all the functions and my experience with building this, then you can go and check that out. I'll put that in the description as well. Thank you guys for watching. This has been Duct Tape Guns with my Steyr AUG A3 assault rifle. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.